The light at the end of the tunnel. It depends how far back in the tunnel you are. And we're all at different stages of the tunnel. The problem is that we've developed societies where 80% of everything is effectively owned and controlled by 20% of the population. And as far as they're concerned, they're already out of the tunnel. That's who politicians pay attention to. There's some very good work by a political scientist called Ben Ansell from Oxford on this. He writes about asset democracy, how basically if you look at the way policies are written, it's all about the protection of assets, ownerships, etc. If we look at the way that economies are being increasingly organized by asset manager firms, the clue's in the name, right? I mean, it's basically about protecting the value of those companies and the income streams that they generate for asset holders. So the political trick, if you will, is how does mass democracy interface with asset owning capitalism? Because that's a new problem, right? What you have to do is to convince a smaller amount of people that your preferences are their preferences, but never have those preferences been so far apart. And a simple example of this is the Yellow Jackets in France. Right, the inability of the French ruling class to think through the consequences of that carbon tax and how it would affect working class people commuting into Paris and other cities, rather than sort of the budgetary effects, is just a great example of that disconnect. So I think that the role of political parties and social movements is to try and make that conversation happen so that asset owners realize that the protection of their assets is insufficient. They need to protect democracy. Democracy is the ultimate best insurance policy over the long run for assets. It's not self-protection, and that's how we need to change that.
That's straight out of his book, Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea, correct?
It is indeed.
Okay.
I'm nothing if not consistent.
Good.
Don't forget that the President of France, the Prime Minister of Italy, and the Prime Minister of Greece, they're both ex-asset managers.
From GS, yep.
Okay, πάμε για άλλη.
No woman has asked a question, so I thought I might try one. In continuation to what you just were talking about, maybe. And I'm thinking, okay, let's hypothesize that people really understand that they're the majority on the planet, and they go out there on the streets and they demand, they do a huge revolution, I don't know what, but it happens one day. Is there any chance that they can win? And what would that way be? Because it seems that the powers are so strong that they can struggle everything or any effort.
My favorite, and Americans love bumper stickers. Europeans don't do this. They're little stickers that you put on the back of your car with a slogan that tells you about their politics or their feelings. I don't know why I'm meant to care about this, but you know, they all have them. And occasionally I see one that I like, and it's a phrase from baseball applied to climate change. Nature bats last. Nature is the last one that comes into the field and decides the game. And we've never been in this world. What ultimately forces this is going to be climate change. Because climate change doesn't accept an argument. Climate change doesn't care what you think. Climate change is already past the point where we can do anything more than adaptation. So all politics going forward is going to be fought out along that terrain. Sadly for the United States, that means 10 years of ultra denial and a turn to the Republican Party and the last giant carbon barbecue, which will produce a lot of GDP, but won't really win in the long term. It's kind of like, you know, running faster and faster into machine gun fire. The lesson then is, what does the rest of the world do? My hopeful version of this is that the EU, in whatever shape or form it's in, really accelerates green investments because it's allowed to do this. If you look on the sidelines of all this stuff, you find something very interesting. The Germans know this, but they're caught rhetorically in their Sparenkultur complex, the savings over everything, the Schwarze Null and the whole thing. But now you've managed to break it. There's a generational change. And what you begin to notice is everything is off balance sheet. Now, on the one hand, this is truly scary because this is the technologies that brought us the financial crisis, right? It's not really on my balance sheet, it's over there. But if you start chucking a couple of trillion euros into really serious green investment and you buy the stuff that the Chinese have already got working at scale, I'll give you a hopeful story. There's a new paper by Donny Farmer that shows that if you track a lot of data over a lot of different renewables over time, there's an inverse Moore's law. Every time you double the scale, the price of renewables drops 30%. So if you run this out over 15 years to 5th generation solar, it has now cost 5% of what it did 15 years ago to produce 7 times the amount of electricity. That's astonishing. Now, is it going to halt all climate change? No. But you're damn straight that China's going to do it. And if the EU and China work together on this, that opens up a whole set of possibilities. My worry for where I live is the United States gets permanently left behind. That's what's going to weaken the dollar more than anything else.
You just reminded me, remember years ago, 2016, Donald Trump was asked by some journalist why he denies climate change. And he said because it would be a victory for communism.
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, true. Never thought of it that way, you're right.
So you mentioned earlier a blockchain.
Yes.
Do you think blockchain will be a solution for Europe's crisis and under which conditions, especially taking in mind of this actual political and financial nomenclatura that rules Europe?
I'm going to pass much of this over to a true expert on this. I have a cynical view of blockchain. Blockchain is a bit like universal basic income. It's a really great idea that people get super excited about, and we're just waiting for one successful test case to show that it works. All right, so I think that it's there. I think it could be used. There are pretty good suggestions out there for how it could be used. Is it going to transform it? I think there's a simple limit, to go back to your question about how you mobilize on this. How do we do things, right? If you have to explain to someone that it's money, it's not money. If you have to have half a computer science degree to understand the thing that's going to make a difference in politics, it's probably not going to work. So if we can figure out a way of making digital technologies work in a very simple, common sense way that makes a difference in the lives of people, then they matter. But until we do that, it's kind of a digital UBI. It's a great idea waiting for a problem to solve.
Since I'm going, επειδή εγώ θα απαντήσω στην ομιλία μου πάνω σε αυτό, δεν θα πω οτιδήποτε άλλο, πάμε σε επόμενη ερώτηση.
So this has been already partially answered, but in your opinion, how would the Eurobond affect the current state of the Eurozone from a more economic perspective?
How would the Euro what?
How would the Eurobond change
change
the current state of the Euro and Europe?
Right, right. Well, it would presume a political organization of Europe that accepts risk and burden sharing and distribution of risk and burden sharing that currently doesn't exist. So in a sense, it would be like having a successful blockchain, right? It would be the end of the process. I think part of the problem is that, particularly because it's such a technocratic situation, that for a long time that conversation has been dominated by economists who think, oh, well, if we just have this bond, then the politics will sort itself out. And it's like, no, you need to sort out the politics, then you'll get the bond. Right, so I think that's how you have to look at it. Hence why you're not going to get from the pandemic special arrangement fund to a bond. Like, it just doesn't automatically follow that way. There has to be the will to burden share. And again, to go back to what you were saying, you know, we kind of forget this, right? But the discourse of build, I mean, holy crap! I mean, it was awful. It was truly awful. This is meant to be some kind of, you know, Enlightenment project. Remember, you know, the Ode to Europe and all this bullshit, right? Within 7 years, what are they doing? They're shouting at each other, shouting racial epithets at each other, right? Northern saints and southern sinners, and Dieselblum, you know, spend it all on money and drink. He's the guy who comes from a prostitution capital. Who the f is he to tell anyone?
I'll add to this, just a couple of vignettes. We do have a Eurobond now, formally, that funds the Recovery Fund, το Ταμείο Ανάπτυξης, in the sense that it is issued jointly and severally by all the member states of the EU. But size matters. Mm-hmm. It's very small, therefore it cannot be a safe asset. It cannot play the role of the US treasuries, American bonds, right? That's point number one. Point number two, it depends on what you use it for. So they are not allowed to use it, the member states, in order to translate national debt into European debt. Right. It would be a proper Eurobond if it allowed for the Europeanization of parts of the debt, a significant part of the debt. Not 1 euro will be Europeanized of existing nation state. And thirdly, the way that they designed it, it is as if it was designed, it was conceived of as a way to destroy Europe. Let me explain why. Remember how it happened? June 2020, they sat around the table, they said, okay, how much money are we going to borrow together? 750. How many of those billions will Italy take? So many. Greece? So many. France? So many. Before they knew what the effect, the impact of the crisis would be on every country. Mm-hmm. And then they gave this money to individual member state governments to spread it around to their mates. So in the end, we created a macroeconomically insignificant Eurobond in order to transfer money from poor German workers to Greek and Italian oligarchs. This is what you do if you want to destroy Europe, and to make sure that there will not be a Eurobond. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether you agree.
It would be hard to disagree with that. The only thing I'd say is I have this abiding image of all human nature, which I got from reading The Guardian once. And it's
I hope you only read The Guardian once.
Just once. But it's this picture that the Guardian readers tend to have of Americans, which is on the one hand, it's 300 million gun-holding, religious bigots, racists, who weigh 500 pounds each lying on a couch with the IQ of a turtle. On the other hand, it's the most Machiavellian foreign policy apparatus the world has ever seen, which has ceaselessly executed every single thing that's ever happened in the world exactly according to its plan. You can't have both, right? Pick one. Or put them together and you end up with a bit of a mess. And sometimes they get what they want, and sometimes there's a reason the British call them caught in the act, which is their nickname for the CIA. I think that that's true as a consequence, but I don't think it was how it started as a cause. It's not to say that there weren't people there involved who thought, oh, this is a good one.
Oh, I'm sure there were. But in the end, that's how it turned out.
That's right, yeah.
So
but the other thing, they haven't spent most of it. I mean, that's the thing that's incredible about it. After all this time, you're out of COVID and you haven't spent most of the funds yet.
Sure.
And one very last question, which would that be?
He has had his hand up from the start.
Sorry?
Mr. Blueshirt has had his hand up from the very beginning.
Thank you. You partly answered my question, but I will still like to make it. I recently heard in the news that ESB is preparing to launch a digital coin called Euro. What are your thoughts about it?
Again, I missed this one.
I heard it. He heard that the European Central Bank is about to launch a digital euro.
Oh, the digital euro.
What do you think about it?
Right. This is all about Facebook, believe it or not. Back in 2015, Mark Zuckerberg, who looks like a charmless version of Commander Data from Star Trek,
he looks nothing like Commander Data.
Yes, he does.
I love Commander Data.
A charmless version of Commander Data. He does. He looks like if Data had a pole up his backside.
Are you a Trekkie as well?
And stop it. Now, the serious point, right? He had this great idea of let's have Libra, let's have a digital currency for everyone on Facebook. So just what a brilliant scam, right? So Facebook is for 1.7 billion people the internet. Because the internet you have to pay for, but Facebook you don't. So for like 1.7 billion people, that's a captive audience. Now you could disintermediate every national currency that they're involved with at a fixed exchange rate, take all their real cash, swap it out for digital cash, and to get them to trade with each other. Once you do this, monetary policy on a global level becomes completely impotent. So the Treasury sat down, apparently, in an emergency meeting with the Fed and went, okay, what are we going to do about this? So they had a conversation, and that got pushed to the side. But then, basically, they took the Chinese one seriously because they were like, hang on a minute, aren't the Chinese doing this? And then loaded it. So it's happening. It's more important in the government space. It was Libra that kicked it off. The ECB is just coming very late to the party. The thing is, it's a very different type of currency, right? Precisely because it's not a reserve asset. When Wall Street says it's going to cash, what they mean is they're buying treasury bonds. It doesn't mean they're actually going to cash, right? When European firms mean they're going to cash, it means, fuck, I'll buy anything, right? Because we don't have a reserve asset. It's totally different. So would that change if they had a digital euro? No, it's precisely the same very restrictive mechanism. It's not as if you're going to magic up an extra trillion in liquidity. Now, given that it's based on a blockchain, if you had individual accounts, you could do that if you wanted to, but they just don't want to. So I think that everything's a reaction to Libra. The Chinese one is serious. The Feds want to be serious, but it's primarily defensive, and they don't know what to do politically because they don't think they can get away with it. And the Euro one, I just don't think is serious. That's my right.
I'll just add my own explanation of why they are not serious about it. It's not that they don't want to. I have inside information which tells me that they are very keen to do it. But they have a constraint that the Chinese central bank doesn't have. And the constraint is the private bankers. The private bankers in the West have an exclusive relationship with central banks. So the only Americans who have the right to hold an account with the Fed, the only Europeans who have the right to have an account with the ECB are the bankers. Okay, this is a very important exclusivity for them because it's QE comes to them through those bank accounts. And then you don't get any of that liquidity. And if you want to use a digital euro, as we speak, you know, your plastic card, your Google Pay, whatever, you have to have a bank account with the pimps of the banking, the payment system, who are the bankers.
The intermediaries.
Yes, the intermediaries. The Chinese central bank are creating digital wallets for anyone without the intermediaries. The ECB would love to do it. They cannot do it because the moment Lagarde says that, she will be decapitated tomorrow by Deutsche Bank, Finanzbank, and the rest.
And the same is true with the Fed. It's exactly the same. Yeah.
Thank you very much.